Today is Friday, September 22nd, 2023, and you have found the Living Youth Podcast here once again with my co-host and compatriot, Wallace Smith. How are we doing, Mr. Smith?
I am doing fantastic. I'm looking forward to, I've got the Living Ed class to teach in just about 44 minutes or so, and I'm geared up. I'm excited, talking about one of my favorite topics. So I'm in a great mood. How are you doing, Mr. Robinson?
Yeah, really good. It sounds like our audience needs to stand by for 43 minutes of great content.
Yeah, we'll see about that. I hope so.
What do we have on tap as our topic for the day?
For our topic today, we are going to take a look at 5 things we discovered as we put them together. 5 things that we look very much forward to in the millennium under the reign of Jesus Christ.
Sounds fantastic.
Let's do it. Welcome back, and it is good to be here. This is, the feast is on us. I'm leaving actually this Sunday. Mr. Robinson, you guys leaving here pretty soon?
We don't leave until Thursday.
Until Thursday. Well, and a lot of our listeners are, I don't even know. Some of you guys might even be on the road already, or maybe you paid that expensive money on an airplane to be able to have Wi-Fi connection. Maybe you're listening when you get back. If you just got back, we hope you had a wonderful feast. But a lot of you, we know that will be on the road and on your way to the feast. And if not, you're certainly in that mood to think about it. And it's on our minds too. We really wanted to talk about something kind of feast related here in this last podcast for us to record before the feast. And we just thought this would be a fun way to go. Not something necessarily too profound, but something that in terms of biblical thinking, which is the theme of the podcast, when it comes to having a biblical mindset, the things of God matter to you, and they're not just abstract. So the idea that Christ is going to come and reign, it's not just some theoretical thing or something that's a doctrine of the church. It's something that should start to mean something to you. The Bible says that Abraham and those who went before us, they looked forward to this city that God was going to build, this new world that Christ was going to bring. And so we kind of thought it'd be fun today to talk about things that we look forward to. We look forward to in the millennium, not a subtle detail, but not just experiencing as people on earth will, but actually being a part of Christ's government to help make these things happen. And we should all have that kind of mindset going into the feast, really thinking about what is this time we're going to picture? What is it going to be like? What are the things we look forward to? So that's what we thought we'd talk about today. Right, Mr. Robinson?
No, that sounds great. When you suggested this topic, as with most of your brilliant topics, I immediately thought, oh, no, that's a good one. Because really, I would have to guess that the majority of people sitting there in our audience at one time or another has thought, man, I can't wait for such and such to be different or fixed or rectified in the millennium. And how fun it would be to go through our, if we did a top 10 list of foundational things that God was going to resolve, it might be a little different than this one because we wanted to do things that hit us a little more personally.
Yeah.
Although it's still consistent with.
If we did this again next year at this time, we might even come up with a different list.
Mm-hmm.
But that is part of it's not a matter that we ignore. Because, we don't vote, we don't participate in politics. It's not a matter that we don't care about what's going on in the world, and it's not that we don't hurt for many of the things going on in the world. In fact, like it says in Ezekiel, God's people tend to sigh and cry for what they see in the world because they do care. But that's part of the joy we have in understanding the gospel is that we might feel powerless now, but there is a time when we will be given the opportunity to do something about these things. And it's actually part of the joy of the knowledge of salvation and what God's plan is. So, yeah. And starting off on this list, we actually made our own separate little list and we put them together. We found out it looked like about 5 things. So it's not because we just thought 5 was a good round number. It doesn't end in a 0, but I still call it a round number because it matches the fingers on one hand. But just kind of the way some of them overlap, some of them were different. And this very first one we have listed is actually one that Mr. Robinson had that I did not have. And I thought it was actually really neat when he brought it up. What's the first thing we look forward to in the millennium, Mr. Robinson, on our list?
All right, good question. So, this could manifest itself in a couple of different ways, but fundamentally, the way food will be grown and harvested, and the way we'll eat. So there's a couple different things that are interesting to me about it. I mean, I'll bet every one of us listening or talking in this podcast today know somebody who has a food sensitivity. A
Yeah,
lot of people. Like I know
definitely.
your wife in particular has.
She
My
has
wife,
to avoid gluten.
yeah, gluten. She has a real strong gluten intolerance. We know a couple people that work here at headquarters have some very severe gluten intolerances. And so when you just see a lot of people with a dairy sensitivity, a gluten sensitivity, and you know that God, when we read the Bible, wheat and milk are some of the most fundamental foods that there are.
Yeah, he actually uses bread as a symbol of Christ, right? It's intended to be a staple of life. Yeah.
So I think I'm on relatively safe ground that my conclusion is there's something we've done in our food manufacturing and processing that's made it so where our bodies are sensitive to these things. There's a number of ways it could be done. I know one of the things I've appreciated about traveling in Europe is there's still in Europe, probably varies by your country, there's still an orientation more towards, hey, even if this takes a little longer and it costs a little more, this is how we want to manufacture our food. Where in the U.S., it's
not that.
It's not that. What is the fastest, most efficient, cheapest way we can make something and make it sit on the shelves for a year? You know, one of the things you find out about bread, for example, which you don't fully, it's crazy as this sounds, you don't fully understand it growing up in our modern society as I did, as most of us have. You know, a loaf of bread is not designed to sit on a shelf for a month in real life. Like when you make your own, exactly. My wife has started making bread once a week. I know others here that make fresh bread. It's gotten, especially during COVID, a lot of people started making sourdough bread. As soon as that thing comes out of the oven, the clock's ticking, you know, and within 24 hours, you can start to understand why the French came up with a whole cuisine of soups and stews and things, so that the bread that's way past it's when you can eat it because it's so stale and crusty. Oh, let's put that in some French onion soup or something, and then so that's where all these where quite a few of these
to kind of hide that the food has started to degrade. That's fascinating. I did see a video once of a guy, and he wasn't trying to say that all of our food practices are healthy that I know of, but he was trying to say, look, it's easy to knock all the chemicals you see. Like when you look at the ingredient list and there's all these words you don't understand. But he took a standard off-the-shelf loaf of bread and went through the ingredient list, ingredient by ingredient. You started getting to these weird words. But he explained the role that every single one of them had. And for those of us with modern taste, not only do some of them end up turning bread into what we expect it to be, but a lot of them were just to make it to you so that it lasts, so that it can go from wherever the bread is made to you and not instantly already be moldy. And like you said, hey, you don't have to have all these things. Yeah, it's definitely true. But at the same time, they're not just added for no reason. And yeah, we have this industrial scale food production, and it is a certain kind of miracle. I for a brief time recently, I've been having my wife got me some smoked salmon. I like smoked salmon, and I have these little crackers, little almond crackers. I eat it with almond flour, and what else? Oh, some cream cheese.
Wonderful.
So I was sitting for lunch. Here's this nice little lunch that my wife has made for me, and I'm looking. Here's this fish I did not raise or catch or skin or fillet. Here's this almond flour stuff. I didn't grow any of that or make these crackers. And here's this cream cheese. I didn't even milk a cow. I'm not anywhere near a cow.
Yeah, you didn't even see a cow.
Is exactly right. And here I am in this world where these things could be brought so easily to my plate, so to speak, and I'm going to enjoy this for lunch. And yet at the same time, there's been a lot of compromising to make some of those things come together, in terms of farm-raised fish, in terms of that we don't even yet fully understand truly how food is supposed to be. It's a radical change that's coming to the world.
We're really disconnected from where our food comes from and understanding how it's made. There was a trend for a while, I don't know if it's still a trend, that was like farm to table. And it was like small restaurants partnering with farms and trying to go, cut out the middleman. But man, in the United States, it's like widespread factory farming, and stuff is packaged in a way that's not always the best health-wise for us by the time it gets to us.
There's things you have to do. I mean, to keep the cows from getting sick, due to the ways in which you farm them, et cetera. So a lot of that's going to be rebooted, and I think that was a great thing for you to come up with.
Well, one of the things we can even take from Scripture is that we don't use the land rests, and we just use chemical fertilizer. Which I'm not necessarily even saying you don't use chemical fertilizer, but we don't
Right.
rest our crops. And one of the things that God says and indicts us for is, in the aftermath of the time of Jacob's trouble and the tribulation, is God said, "Now my lands will have their Sabbath rests." And so there's all kinds of things we're doing that aren't how God intended them. To be
society needs kind of a reboot from the start to fix some of these fundamental things, and that reboot is coming. We look forward to it in the millennium.
I'll say this real quickly. It was one of the first times, second time I'd been to France for the feast, and we were way more rural than usual. We were somewhere way out in the Lorraine region. In fact, you're getting close to Germany. It was interesting to watch the houses change to where the closer you got to the border, the more they took on a bit of a German look to them.
Interesting.
But there was a guy there at this little family-run place where we had the feast, and he gave me a little bit of grappa, so some kind of like a liqueur kind of thing.
I feel like I've heard
and it was
the name.
like, my father made this. We're the only ones in this region that made it. And that's where I started to gain an appreciation for, man, historically, thousands of little family farms made their own unique thing, and like how we've lost the wide variety of things, It's not just one type of cheese out there, or there's not even like just 5 or 6 types of cheeses. There's hundreds of different types of cheeses, for example.
Right.
Same thing with wine, and each area has its own unique specialness to it that makes something that doesn't taste like anywhere else. And I just think that's neat. I look forward to a return to the vast variety of what the earth's abundance that we can get from, because God's is the way of give. I mean, He gives us this amazing earth that we can do so many things with.
When you mentioned this one, it was one that stood out from, because we've talked before, the little broadcast here, of course, and you said that, and it wasn't obvious to me at first. Like, that'll be good to change. But then, the more I thought about it, and the more little few things you said, it's like, yeah, that'll be radical, and it'll be wonderful. The second one on the list is one I think both of us had, and I'd asked my wife. Actually, this morning, hey, what's one thing you look forward to? And man, this was the first thing. It just came right out of her mouth. No more lying. And I do look forward to the millennium to being where the entire world, due to Christ's influence over time, will commit itself to a culture that wants to obey the commandment not to bear false witness. And there's 2 ends to that spectrum. One is just on the personal level. A culture that actually truly embraces that command, and how many lives will be repaired? How many people will discover how beautiful life can be when you're actually just being truthful, and that life isn't this kind of constant trying to maintain a falsehood. But it goes further. So you get into entertainment, and how much of, when it comes to entertainment, is actually built on not dwelling in reality, not actually dwelling with the way the world actually is, but it's an escape to the way you wish the world were. And even it's not necessarily a good world, it's just something to get you away from that, the truthful reality of the world. But then, most fundamentally, we increasingly have a society that is actively avoiding reality. You and I were listening to a podcast snippet just this morning that you shared with me not long after I got up. Miss Robinson gets up early and hits the books. And anyway, he sent me this clip of a podcast, and the individuals were talking about postmodernism and the idea that, why are so many people motivated to go for this idea inherent in postmodernism, that there really is no fundamental reality. It's rather just how you decide reality should be. And you can build all these theories that, you're kind of ignoring science. You just actually don't even like the scientific approach to things. There's no real fundamental truth. And without going into detail here, because I think it would be a distraction, he essentially has this idea that there's people motivated to that, because if you can actually discredit the idea that there's any fundamental reality, well, you actually can just spend the rest of your life profitably pushing your theory about everything, in terms of how you want things to be. And regrettably, not really regrettably, but reality is actually real. There is a world where things are true, and I look forward to the millennium when all of civilization at least fundamentally agrees We're not going to try to ignore reality. Humanity works a certain way. God has designed the world to be a certain way. When children are born, male or female, they are actually male and female. That there'll be a fundamental dedication to what is real and what God has actually created. And I think you mentioned the comment earlier when we discussed this, that the creation is not just the trees around us and the air and the grass, but no, all of the laws, this profound understanding that there is a reality at the core of what we are. And let's try to live in touch with that embraces that reality. And I know it gets kind of weird and it sounds kind of philosophical, but that's one thing I do look forward to. The millennium, the Creator will actually rule the earth, and he will actually try to help mankind live in accordance with the actual creation he created, what reality actually is.
Do or do not. There is no try. My favorite reality check, if you're kind of wondering, is jump out of a tree and let me know if you hit the ground, because that's going to happen 100% of the time. Yeah. I would only add one small thing to this. To me, I look forward to no more lying, and just the most basic transactions we have as humans will be trustworthy. I mean, I'm willing to bet that there's a few female listeners out there that had to take their car into the mechanic and want to know, is the mechanic telling me the truth?
Yeah.
So many basic interactions we have with strangers, and you want to believe they're telling you the truth, but are they really? You don't know. And just imagine a world where you can run up and talk to anybody or ask them something, and whether even if they don't know something perfectly, they're not going to deliberately try to deceive you.
Yes, it doesn't mean they're not tactful and friendly, but yeah, someone who you can guarantee is not actually out to hide the truth from you and to deceive you and manipulate you. There's actually a book. I've every once in a while I think about getting it and I forget about it and then forget how to find it. And I find it and I still don't get it. But this guy kind of wrote a story about how world changing it would be the moment a perfect lie detector were created. And where it's guaranteed it'll tell you this person's lying or not, and how it starts to make its way into society and people start wearing them and different things. And if I recall, it could have he's trying to create a dystopia, but I think in the end he was actually trying to highlight the opposite.
It seems like most of our human solutions are how to resolve a problem instead of like, people lie, so how do we deal with that? We have a detector. No, it's like raise kids and teach them that lying's bad,
Right. And I will say that this one, it can seem like it's simply colored by the idea of what's going on these days, that essentially we're lying to children and telling them they can be a different sex. And it's more profound than that, but do think about that, because they keep surrounding this child in a world that ignores reality that they've created based only on theory and ideas and fantasy. And yet that child will grow up and years later eventually hits the wall and recognize you've ruined a life because you've convinced someone to try to pretend that reality isn't real. But it's far more profound. It's not just the more recent, because it's easy to think, oh yeah, that's a recent development. No, it's more profound than that. That's the most recent manifestation of this idea that we can remake the world in our image instead of just embracing the way it actually is.
This could be a potential segue into our fourth point, if you wanted, depending on the order. So, for example, you keep you saying this, and I keep thinking about. So we could just stick with the transgender lie. There is a group of people out there that is profiting from this transgender lie.
Yeah, let's turn. You're right. Let's do that. We're going to transition to our point 4. Okay. Don't worry if you're keeping track. We skipped point 3. We'll come back to it. But yeah, there's a lot of money to be made in all of this.
Apparently, the numbers are mind-boggling of how profitable it's been for surgeons and hospitals willing to. My wife read something where somebody had gone and looked up one of these hospitals and how many people they had in line for gender reassignment surgery, and the youngest was like 8. It's just absolutely
so
appalling.
Heartbreaking.
But this transitions into our other point, which is, you'll see why we want to go into it, which is, you want me to lead into it?
I wrote it. It's so long. I wrote this one. Yeah, feel free.
It's something we've talked about a little bit on the podcast, but it certainly deserves its own point, which is, this fundamental, like, people lying because it benefits them or they profit in some way, at least in the short term. But we would like to see, this is our other point, we're going to call this point 3, or we're going to call it.
Let's rename it point 3. We'll call it point 3. It's the third one.
An end to seeing humans as a commodity to be exploited like mere objects.
Yeah.
So true.
Yeah, we wrote that one, and it seemed awkward and long, but we want to keep it that way.
Well, yeah, because
an
there's
end
a
to
lot
seeing
falls into that.
human. Yeah, it does, because we had so many different detailed ideas, and they seem to fall into this category. An end in the millennium, an end to seeing human beings as a commodity to be exploited like mere objects. So, for instance, on various ends of the scales, it's not just even one scale, but human trafficking. Part of what human trafficking is treating humans like cargo. And why treat them that way? Because there's money to be made. Hey, if I can deliver these, I don't go into too many details here. We struggle with how much to share in terms, but still, if I ship these people over here for this terrible, rotten, horrible reason, I'm going to make a good bit of money, and I don't even have to treat them well. The whole goal is just to get them here. How many people crushing to get into the United States and are promised, hey, let me do this to get you there, and actually are terribly abused for it. Abusers out there who just see other people as just an opportunity to profit or benefit themselves.
I know this could be controversial, but since I lived in Texas for a long time and felt like a little closer to what was going on down there, one of my the main objections I had to just mass undocumented immigration along the southern border wasn't, I'm not against people getting a better life. It was the vast amount of criminal activity that went on across the border, and the human trafficking was considerable. And the cartels make a lot of money getting people into the country, and they're not just like, oh, okay, enjoy your new life in America. A lot of them find themselves in a pretty nasty situation where other people are taking advantage of them.
Yeah, it really, and that we're here. It's clear we're talking about illegal things.
Yeah.
I'm not sure. What's the name of the movie that's really popular these days? The streaming services don't want. The Sound of Freedom.
Yep.
Sound of Freedom. Mr. D. Simone and I went to go see that, and it actually was stunning how well they shot it in such a way, given the delicacy of the topic. But it made an impact. But that said, here we're talking about clearly illegal things. But I don't want to come across as a socialist. If you listen to our podcast on socialism and capitalism, understand we're neither. We believe in what God wants to do, and so definitely I'm not pro socialism. But at the same time, part of what's encouraged in our country, which very capitalistic, very seeking profits. If I own a share in a company, that the company has an obligation to try to increase the value of my shares and to do what it can to give me the profit that I'm looking for. But the end result of that, if you're not careful, is just that you see human beings as a commodity, and you stop actually caring about the customer, because it becomes part of, well, what can the customer give me? Because that's the only reason I'm even doing this business, is because of what the customer is capable of giving me. And after a while, then eventually you do get things where you have companies who knows their product is harmful, but goes ahead and markets it anyway. And so you pass laws to try to prevent people from doing what is harmful. But there's always some new harm that you haven't discovered yet that some company might happen to find out, but it's not illegal, and so they just go ahead and do that. But I'd get, this is a little weird, but even in this environment, people see themselves as a kind of commodity. How many, without advertising any of the websites or something how many people are actually going online to fundamentally sell themselves because they've sold this kind of bill of goods that this is a worthwhile thing to do, and in the end fail to even see themselves for what they truly are? And what are human beings truly? Human beings are creations of God intended to bear his image. Mm-hmm. Every single human being has that potential when they're born of actually becoming an eternal God being, existing with him in glory for all time. And so when you see a group of children, when you see adults, even adults that we consider the horrible people of the past, a Genghis Khan, whatever the case is, what God sees in every human being is someone that he wants to accept his son Jesus Christ, to have in his family one day, to be with him for all eternity. And it's like it's on the furthest idea of what you could think of a human being as, versus just being essentially cattle, just an object. It's just something I can sell or I can make money from or I can personally benefit from. And the idea that we'll finally live in a world, which we've never had, no country in the world. It's like people think of the United States. The United States has been built on an idea of a very special brand of individual freedom. And I'm not knocking that in the sense that I appreciate the freedoms I have, including to get cream cheese and smoked salmon and crackers, for lunch. I appreciate the freedoms that I have. But kind of a radical view of individual freedom in the end has to kind of, I don't know how to put it, but has to even give us the freedom to consider our brother or sister as not as important as us. We become the centers of our own world. But you look at like the Old Testament, God was always trying to guard against that thing. Like he talked about usury, or he talked about if your brother has need, don't exploit that for your benefit. Don't charge him interest, and consider your brother in his need to be a source of profit for you.
Right.
And getting rid of that idea in the millennium, I can't wait to live in that world.
Yeah. No. Amen, brother. Can we say that?
I think we can. We'll find out if we can get away with it. So
all right. Comment and like down below. No, I'm just kidding. Yeah. There really sadly is no end to the ways in which we've exploited one another as human beings and for selfish profit. And I really do look forward to the end of that. It's not, without rehashing the point and going back to a dark place. It's like that, but that movie bringing to light about the exploitation that's going on there really, really made me angry and like ready to if God's like, okay, I need 10 groups to take care of 10 different problems. Who wants to go take care of the traffickers? Man, that's the one I'm signing up for.
If God made the list available ahead of time, you'd already pre-order that spot. Okay, the next one that we have, it's now the next one. It was number 3, and now it's number 4 on our list. Is also another one Mr. Robinson brought up, and I don't think it was your idea originally, but elaborate. I love it.
Yeah. Well, let me give credit to Mrs. Robinson for this one. So let's get some insight into me and our marriage, more than you guys ever wanted to know. But I've going back so when I started giving sermonettes a little more than 15 years ago, my wife would say, I was just reading this and this and this in the Bible. Don't you think that would be an interesting topic? Because I was really working hard to get topics for the sermonettes. And a lot of times I would sadly say, no, that doesn't, how am I going to make a sermon out of that? And some of the best sermonettes I ever did were ideas like that she came up with. Really? And I was like, no, it really is quite interesting. And so I asked her, like you asked Mrs. Smith, I asked Mrs. Robinson what we're going to podcast about. And she said, well, the Sabbath and the holy days, what are you looking forward to being restored in
the millennium
on a worldwide? And I thought, oh, okay, yeah. And that's kind of obvious. Yeah, exactly.
Honey, that's right.
But she had a great point, and she shared with me, she's been watching off and on. I know a number of people have been. There's this Exodus series that Jordan Peterson is kind of headlining, but he has a group of people like Dennis Prager and Ben Shapiro's come on, and a collection of people, and they're going through Exodus, and they're doing the best to understand it, and they're talking about it. And you'll see how these ideas dovetail here in a moment. But it's been kind of eye-opening because as much as they're trying to understand the book of Exodus, I said this morning, the average church member could sit on that panel and would know more than most of those guys.
Right.
Yeah. They're doing their best, but they miss key things because they don't understand how the holy days work, really. That you would think the Jews have an advantage there, but they actually don't know that much more about the holy days. It's stunning how little they know. They don't really know the purpose of trumpets, and yeah, exactly. So, but one person on the panel had an interesting observation and said, sometimes in our lives we're hit with a revelation. So something is revealed to us and we're like, it's an aha moment, a moment of clarity or an epiphany, if you will. And we recognize it as this profound understanding, a truth that we maybe didn't have before. And so we're like, okay, this is a big deal. And so temporarily we try to orient our lives towards it. So it's an orienting thing. Since it's a truth, it helps us orient ourselves in our lives and be on the right path. But the problem with it is over time that will fade unless there's a repetition element to it. And so that was why my wife thought it was interesting, and hopefully I'm kind of articulating her idea correctly, but it made sense to me. When because Mr. O'Gwen talked about this. There's a scripture he stopped, and it was in Leviticus or one of the first 5 books that talked about the family and the Sabbath. And he said, "Boy, you want to know what's the foundational things that God's going to restore first in the millennium? It was the family and the Sabbath." And the family was fairly obvious to me. The restoration of families is going to be a pretty big deal for obvious reasons. We could actually do a whole podcast on that, frankly. But the Sabbath was a little less obvious to me. But what do the Sabbath and the holy days do? They are repetitive. They bring a remembrance to us. So we have the Sabbath, which is a weekly remembrance, and we have the holy days, which is an annual remembrance of a more kind of big picture idea. But again, the question sort of was, well, why the Sabbath? Like, I understand it's important, but like, what's the deeper significance? Well, when you read through the 10 Commandments and you read the commandments on the Sabbath, it has a clear link back to the creation.
Right.
And the Sabbath, this is a lot of mainstream Christians like either don't realize or forget. The Sabbath was established at creation, so there's an inexorable tie to it. And so, at least at a very simple level, when Christ returns, and the knowledge of Him will cover the earth as the waters cover the sea, and people they get this revelation, okay, and it changes their lives. Well, what would happen if there was no reinforcement of it? There was no repetition of these ideas. Well, we would all begin to fade away from it again. But it's not. He has built into His plan repetition. The weekly Sabbath, aside from just being a rest and extra family time and getting closer to God and putting aside our own personal things we want to deal with and putting something far more important in focus in our lives, should also always remind us of the creation. And as you said earlier in the beginning of the podcast, the creation is the most fundamental reality that we have. It is God's most fundamental truth. So I thought that was actually a really good observation that, like, yes, the Sabbath, but why? How what's like the kind of this, where the rubber meets the road kind of one way in which the Sabbath is critical, and that is keeping everybody when the Sabbath is new to them in particular, a weekly reminder of this is why we're doing what we're doing.
Yeah, I thought that was so insightful when you mentioned that. And I've tried to make a similar point when I give sermons sometimes, but not, I don't feel really hitting it in the way that you did there. Like I've tried to say, God doesn't create a new set of holy days every year. He keeps having us go through the exact same one. And at the same time, like sometimes when I've talked to people who've left the church and they've been gone for some time, and it may not be true of everyone, but many that I've talked to, how it's amazing what they've forgotten. And it's like, wow, it's not just that they don't believe it anymore. It's that they don't even remember that they once did sometimes. Yep. And part of that, I do believe, all the more based on what you said, is because they've taken themselves out of God's continual refresher program of trying to make sure we remain in this faith and understanding.
You and I, sadly, we both know people over the decades that somebody was with us and then drifted away, kind of back into the world. And you hate to set up a litmus test, but you kind of wonder how far have people drifted? What do they still know? I came to realize when they aren't even aware that the holy days have come up, because like for a while you still kind of know.
It's the fall. You guys are going to your feast.
Yeah. When they're not even aware that the fall holy days are hitting, then it's not even in their life anymore. They've drifted pretty far.
Yeah. And so when you mentioned that she had said that she looks forward to the Sabbath and holy days being instituted in the millennium, I thought, just imagine what a different world it would be when the entire world is getting that instruction every single Sabbath and reminder of the plan they're a part of every single holiday season. I thought it was fantastic. So, it's 1:20. I think we might make it.
I think we can do it.
We might make it. The last point, and this was, I think both of us had an overlap here, and that we look forward to. So these aren't the only things we look forward to, but we are looking forward to these 5 things in the millennium, is a restoration of the family the way God designed it to be. There is no lasting civilization of any health without God's design of the family being present and serving as its foundation. And so many of the various harms and sufferings and heartaches and mysterious challenges that we don't know why our life is so frustrated or so confusing, so many of what our world experiences that is negative on a great scale and a small scale are rooted in the deformation and the destruction of the godly family. And I think it's going to be part of God's priority number, I'd say priority number one. I'm not trying to exaggerate, but a key thing that he looks forward to implementing in the world is he started by creating mankind, by designing the family, and we're going to get back to that. We're going to have the family exist the way it's supposed to be, and I think it's going to be transformative. Right. I think it's going to be a big part, a big ingredient of how God changes the world.
It's actually mind-boggling when you think about how far we've drifted from the ideal of the family in our own society. Like we've seen movies and heard things and read things of, we're trying to posit every which way you can call something a family other than like the real family. Yeah. You know, an ad hoc collection of friends and coworkers can become a family. You know, one person famously said once, "I don't have friends, I have family," which is, he did not have in mind a family like God has in mind. Yeah. And you know, if you look at the family as the most basic structure, it really is the perfect mechanism for raising children. But I don't want to limit it to that, but it is. You know, it's a very, you know, you're a husband and a wife. You create this baby together. It gestates with the mother for 9 months. It comes out. It's such an intimate thing. The mom is bonded to it. Dad, when he stays, bonds to it. And now you've created this tight tie between these three people, and you do everything you can to protect them and raise them. And it's this perfect. What word am I looking for here? Like a situation to raise children in. And
circumstance.
How many problems are we going to resolve? Like you look at all, like the drug problem and some of the homeless problem and all these things, and we've talked about this before. What do we trace it all the way back to? Ultimately, kids that grew up in a suboptimal situation, or frankly a terrible situation, and weren't taught the most basic things, and then they end up with vast problems in their life. Can you imagine a world that we live in where everybody's primary focus was their family and raising their family and having a relationship with God? I mean, it sounds so simple, but it's
you know, and even cases, because I've known families whose children went astray, and they did kind of everything they could do, it seemed. But at the same time, why did that child, what was at least one element of that child's going astray? Well, because they were exposed to other people where that was not the case. And that's why it's so revolutionary. Even in this world, you can strive to make sure your family is as God designed it, but you're doing so in a world surrounded by not that. And that just makes it all the much harder on you. And that's what I think is among the things that is so revolutionary about the millennium, is that every family will have the help it needs, will have that glorified child of God, that when it sees the father or the mother or the child kind of straying in a different direction, it'll have that voice saying, don't go to the right, don't go to the left, you know, just stay on the path, such that families everywhere will have that opportunity to be the kind of family that God wants. To just, I think it'll be fundamentally revolutionary, and will actually be some of the greatest sources of joy and hope that people experience in the millennium. Not just being in a family, which the way you put it, Mr. Robinson, was just perfect. What better circumstance to pass on a civilization, you know, to have God's way set before these people, and then create this environment where if everything is done as it should be, that gets passed on to the next one. It is a, this is going to sound really like it's a big epiphany when it's actually what we teach as a fundamental thing in God's church. It is a picture of exactly what God is trying to do in the world. He's trying to reproduce himself. Mm-hmm. And this is exactly what the family gives us an opportunity to do, for a husband and wife to have that opportunity to pass on everything they have to someone else, who will then have the opportunity to pass it on to someone else. So, yeah, I look forward to that.
You know what? I actually really appreciate you mentioning earlier about because you're exactly right. You can actually do really what most people would consider like a good job in your marriage and a good job raising your children. But there's these X factors of society, which is working really hard to convince your kids to go a different way.
Oh, yeah.
And you can actually do a good job and still have kids that struggle.
Yeah, in a world where people aren't trying to divide your family. Think of not having that concern. If anything, the rest of the world is geared towards respecting your family and its integrity.
That's why the 3 S's, Satan, self, and society. And society, until it is fundamentally changed, is definitely something we have to fight against, and we don't always win that battle.
Well, we started this by mentioning that some of you guys may be on your way to the Feast of Tabernacles. Maybe you're not. Maybe you're still at home. You're still planning. We have no idea.
What are you doing? Get to the feast.
But we want all of you to know that we are thinking about you. We pray that you have a wonderful feast. And I hope that in the end, if y'all listen to this, if you listen to it with your family or just listen to it by yourself, that it won't stop here. That's just me and Mr. Robinson talking about 5 things we look forward to. What better kind of conversation could you have on the way to the feast with your family, or at the feast with people that you've met, or old friends or new friends, and talk yourselves? What is something that you look forward to being very different and very wonderful in the millennium? Hopefully this conversation will spur you to have your own conversations.
Smith and Robinson.